Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We're taking another look at 20th Century Boys and wrapping up the 10th volume. We are almost done with the story, and we're getting a lot of the important pieces of the puzzle that will let us put the capstone on the adventure of Kenji and his friends. And we had the most important piece, Kenji himself, fully brought into the light in the last installment. So in this installment, we're actually not going to see Kenji almost at all. What we are going to see is the pieces of the puzzle, I suppose, for not so much the situation, but the conclusion begin to come together. When we last left our story, Kana was preparing to attempt to assassinate our friend, and that's pretty much where we pick up. We come right back into that story. We bring back the last couple of important characters from the Tokyo group. She was already working with Acho and Yoshitsune. And in this segment, we bring Yukiji back as well. And she's going to be kind of important here. We actually begin on kind of a unrelated scene where we get some chatter in the street from people who are discussing disposition of the Global Defense Force and our friend's confidential guard. And it turns out all of these people are students at a dojo that Yukiji runs, but that she's closing down now. She's joining this final operation against Friend, and she wants her students to kind of disperse and go their own ways because she figures she may not survive this and can't really teach the dojo anymore. All well and good. We get an interesting flashback between Yukiji and Kiriko, Kenji's older sister, that is kind of a setup for Yukiji to suggest that Kana should go and meet her mother. Turns out that Yukiji's friend, the lawyer, and let me get her name real quick. Ichihara, Setsuko Ichihara. She has been researching and has tracked down Kiriko's location. Very interesting set of circumstances there that we're not going to dig too deep in here. It is rather straightforward the way they deliver the exposition, so there's not a whole lot interesting from a narrative viewpoint there. But the circumstances make sense. They do a good job of just setting up all the details and saying, okay, this is what happened before Bloody New Year's Eve. The important thing is that she's living in a compound now out west, which makes the logical person to go and find her Maro, who was already out that way when Namio went to visit Hokkaido. And so he decides to stop by this compound, and he sees flying over the flag of Frog-Doom, which tells us right away that we are going to find out what happened to Karo-yan. And that is pretty much what we get. Karo-yan found Kiriko in America. He was in a factory where they were making vaccines for the 2015 strain of virus. They were ambushed by Friend there and brought back to Japan, where they were kept in custody for a little while, but eventually allowed to go their own way. This flashback does more to establish Karo-yan and his motivations, and it emphasizes that Karo-yan was not the most responsible person. He did not do very well by his family or his friends in the year 2000. He was cheating on his wife. He was planning to run away with a younger woman on Bloody New Year's Eve. And this is a shame that has followed him for most of his life. He has tried to make up his failures in the times since. And I like this because while Kenji himself has always had his intentions pointed he has always been a very aspirational character. He has always been motivated to do his best for his community and his family. But not all of his friends turned out as well as Kenji did. Obviously, one of them became a genocidal world dictator. But he also had people like Acho, who was not very good to his family and was kind of neglectful to them. He still provided for them, loyal to them, but he was not there when tragedy struck them, and that has always haunted him. He kind of went on a downward spiral until he began to drag himself out. Um, and Carry-On is another example of that kind of nuance, whereas Morrow was very, very steady, probably the most successful of the bunch um, in setting up his own family, where Monchan was like the really successful businessman, where Yoshitsune was like this office drone who didn't really assert himself but stuck by his friends. Carry-On is kind of the black sheep of the group, um, assuming we exclude, of course, the friend himself. Acho, or excuse me, Carry-On is the guy who made the most mistakes, but still ultimately makes good. I like that level of nuance, that not all of Kenji's friends turned out the same way, or even followed the same general path of either becoming successful businessman or staying home in the Chamber of Commerce. Not everyone was there when Kenji needed them. But little by little, as the stakes have risen and as the need for more hands has become more apparent, one by one they came out of the woodwork, and they are there when it really counts, because they can see the stakes and their sense of duty compels them to do something. This is a theme in this part of the story that I really like. The really important thing here, though, is that Kiriko is once again working on a vaccine. There is going to be yet another virus attack. The friends are building a flying saucer, so aliens are going to come and distribute the virus. And Kiriko is trying to prepare a vaccine ahead of time, and lacking a wide array of test subjects, she's going to test it on herself. So we get a shot of her exposing herself to the virus after vaccinating herself, and Morrow and Carry-On are there to see it play out. All in all, pretty good and very effective mix of flashbacks for exposition and driving forward what's going to happen next. So in the present day, Kana and company are on their crusade to take down our friend. Yoshitsune wants to come with them along with Yukiji and Acho, but they make him stay behind because he's the one who knows how to run an organization, who has an organization in place, and who can pick up the pieces and carry on if they don't make it. And none of them really expect to survive the attempted assassination, whether it works or not. So they go in to the three of them, but Kana goes a step further. She actually turns Yukiji and Acho over to the guards by warning the guards that they're carrying weapons, and she herself gets all the way through. Friend, who she instantly recognizes, of course, is not her father. This is the stand-in. There's an interesting confrontation where Kana tries to figure out how many of these doppelgangers friend might have had, whether this guy is just making a play for position now that friend is actually dead, or whether this has always been a part of the plan. Ultimately, since this is not Kana's father, he's not really attached to her like the original friend was. So he has her rejected. In other words, he puts out a kill order on her. But Kana has a grenade in her pocket, and she menaces friend with it and uses that technique to scare off the guards and get to an elevator where she can get away. In the meantime, Yuki and Acho are taken to Manjome's office, and they find him dead there. Presumably, they were taken there because loyalists, guards, subverted them. But what ultimately happens is once they're there, they meet with the head dream navigator, gives them their weapons back, and says, basically, we're going to frame you for Manjome's murder. Obviously, this is a purge of a dissident inside the FTP, and once again, they are sticking the blame on dissidents. So, all in all, the kind of internal scheming you would expect from the FTP at this point. But you can't just catch your dissidents really easy and have the assassination of Manjome cleaned up that fast. They want to continue to leverage that, so they allow Acho and Yuki leave. It would make more sense, in my opinion, simply dispose of them and keep that fact a secret. But these are main characters, so that doesn't happen. I think this is a bit of a hole in Urasawa's writing, but there does seem to be a level of personal rivalry at play as well. The Dream Navigator is going to become the new Holy Mother. She's going to have the replacement friend's child to replace Kana, and they're going to rewrite the entire series of prophecies that the FDP has been built on. The thing is, there is no spark. There is no real connection between the new friend and the chief Dream Navigator, unlike between Yukiji and Kenji. And we actually get that is actually something the Dream Navigator uses to provoke Yukiji. Seems to be a kind of one-sided rivalry at play there. The Dream Navigator, she's a very cold woman. She doesn't seem to have ever established a real emotional connection with anyone, and she sees this opportunity to be the Holy Mother as a way to fill the void, I think. And that's an interesting thing, not one that is deeply explored in this part of the story, but there will be more of that later. All in all, I think it's an interesting character moment for her, but it's still not enough to explain why Acho and Yukiji are allowed to leave the FDP headquarters. And that is a plot hole. I think it is a bit of a weakness here. But at this point, it is also kind of in line with the way the FDP is working right now. They are not very well managed anymore. Manjome and the first generation friend were the people who were really the cold-blooded schemers. And the people who are left seem to be the starry-eyed people who think they are actually accomplishing something big and meaningful, all of their empty manipulations and lies. So, in a way, I guess it is thematically appropriate that Acho and Yukiji are allowed to leave by these very naive people who believe they have all the pieces in place. I'm still not sure I like it. I would have liked to see them be a little more proactive in their own escape. But at this point, they are in their late 50s, and they are not quite as spry and ready to take on these challenges as they were. So maybe Urasawa felt it was more believable for them to just be allowed to walk out. I don't know. I haven't seen the alternative scenario play out. I just know it's probably what I would have liked more. But it does create... and one other thing that is accomplished by this, which may also be part of why they're allowed to walk out, is it prevents a certain degree of internal conflict. Because as Yukiji and Acho are leaving, they run into Mabo, one of the twins. We haven't seen them in, a long time. Mabo is now the Minister of Science and Technology under the FDP, and he's part of Manjome's faction. And if Manjome had too many other faction members, especially in the cabinet, so long as there's sort of the important pieces, which everyone agrees is Acho and Yukiji, as long as those important pieces are still on the table, perhaps they can maintain a certain level of peace between the two factions in the FDP. That may be another reason they were allowed to walk. If that's the case, it's never made clear in the narrative at any point, and it would have been better to have that explicitly stated, I think, to make it clear, rather than leaving it up to the audience to infer, because it just kind of looks like the FDP is competent at this point. And that could be the point. I mean, we have seen them, the facades they're putting up become very weak, but one way or another, this is what happens. Mabo is there to, first to give us a little more exposition. Yanbo and Mabo were never really a part of Kenji's circle, but they were offered the opportunity to join him in his crusade in the year 2000. And they turned it down because they thought it would be better for them to join with the FDP, and they didn't see the FDP for what it was at the time. They knew that Kenji and his friends probably weren't the terrorists they were always made out to be. But to be perfectly honest, nobody saw this pivot in the FDP coming outside of the inner circle, at least in my opinion. Like many political movements and social phenomena, the simple trappings that surrounded it were probably all most people saw for a long period of time. Yanbo and Mabo, however, turned on the FDP when a close friend of theirs who had worked with them since the inception of their business died in the plagues of 2015. They put together their own plan to undo everything the FDP is trying to accomplish, and they enlist the aging robotics professor Shikishima, build a robot, and shoot down the flying saucer that is going to bring the quote-unquote space aliens onto the scene at the peak of the final prophecy. Basically show the world that the FDP is a fraud. They finance it, they embezzle the resources, and they convince Shikishima to come to their side. And this is another instance of, again, a character from Kenji's circle of friends who, or at least circle of acquaintances, because Yanbo and Mabo were not really Kenji's friends. But these are people who see the necessity of joining forces with him, even though at first they were not eager to be associated with Kenji. And I like that theme. It shows that not everything is Kenji's personal charisma and his ability to bend the world to his will. Some of it is just people recognizing that they need to do certain things to fulfill their responsibilities. And that's what's brought Yanbo and Mabo into line. There is a reference later in this section as Kana closes up her confrontation with Friend. She mentions, we learned that the new Friend, who is, at this point we know, has been with the FDP from its inception, is actually the person responsible for Kana's special powers. The original Friend did not have unusual abilities. Kana does, because the new Friend gave gave Kiriko a potion that, as he calls it, a magic potion. We're not sure exactly what that entails, but it guaranteed Kana would have powers. Does that work? Well, we also don't know that. But the thing about Kana is she doesn't think her powers are very worthwhile. And she tells Friend this as part of her total rejection of everything the FDP stands for. She says, I think the ability to move people's emotions with a song is much more powerful than the special abilities that I've been given. That's interesting because it stands in stark contrast to Kenji's current attitude. You recall in the previous section, Kenji stated that you can't move people and change the world with just music or just manga. And that is an interesting line of tension to introduce this late in the story, because it has been these powerful emotional appeals that Kenji and all three of the manga artists that we have seen, that has been their primary weapon as they fight against our Friend. And even Kenji, when he was leading his rebel movement, really just had his persuasive ability, his ability to evoke people's sense of emotions and duties. That was what primarily he used to move people to his side. But what is the meaning of this conflict? Well, don't know quite yet. That answer will come in the next volume. In the meantime, there is one last thread that is introduced here. We come back to Kiriko, and we get a flashback that she shares with Maro and Karo Yan, which is important for us, the audience, to have, because it explains the final gambit, our Friend's final gambit, for lack of a better way to put it. We get a flashback to her talking with Yamane Sadakiyo and our Friend, and we see that there are actually, to our surprise, 2 kids wearing Sadakiyo's mask. And that is basically the way that the second friend is going to be explained. He's always been there, and anytime we see someone in Sadakiyo's mask, it could be Sadakiyo, it could be the other friend. I really dislike this explanation. Of course, the new friend could be anyone, technically. It could be anyone who's about the same build and dimensions as the old friend who could get plastic surgery to change the way his face looked. Problem was, in order to be a true antagonist in the story, friend needs to be someone who has known Kenji since the beginning. So his presence has to be retconned into the story, because I guarantee you Urasawa did not begin the manga with the idea that one antagonist would die and then be replaced by another one. So there's no setup for this. The use of Sadakiyo's mask introduced a sense of uncertainty about who we are seeing whenever we see someone in the mask is interesting. The problem is there's not enough differences in behavior. Everyone seems to recognize that the new friend is a different person underneath the friend mask. And there are some differences in behavior that clue us into that. But oddly, Sadakiyo, when we see him in the past, when he's just a child, and the other person in the mask would presumably be a child as well, there are fewer differences between Sadakiyo and the new friend than there are between Fukube and the new friend. And that creates a problem. Why is the new friend a better actor in the past than he is in the present? Why is he better at filling the shoes of someone else in the past than in the present? Now, that could just be because Sadakiyo is a very unusual type of person and he's harder to mimic. Okay, maybe. But that would actually, no, now that I say that out loud, it would, you would expect then there to be more differences when he was a child than an adult. But yeah, it's not a very good explanation, and it's clearly just introduced to retcon another character into Kenji's past. I really, really don't like it. But at this point in the story, where Urasawa has been kind of running on the serialization treadmill for as long as he has, this may have been the only solution he could come up with in the time he had. I'm not going to workshop whether there could have been a better solution to this or not. I have no doubt there was. I'm not going to sit here and try and propose them because this is a story we got. This is a shortcoming of the kind of storytelling that Urasawa was doing. When you are in a serialized, constantly producing format like a bi-weekly, which I thought this was a monthly, but apparently it was a bi-weekly publication, you have to keep churning this out, and you can't always take a break and map out a huge amount of stuff in ahead of time. So it seems like the first friend was killed on New Year's Day of 2015 by Yamane, and then Urasawa wasn't quite sure how he kept his antagonist going, and this was the solution he eventually came up with. It's not great, but it is what we got. That's all I have to say about that. Really, your medium and your format does impose strict limits on you that don't always work to your favor. And this just seems to be a case of that playing out. It's not good storytelling, but it may have been the best that he could do at the time. It is what it is. That said, I think many of the payoffs we get still work in spite of this flaw in the story, and I think this is the greatest flaw in the entirety of the 20th Century Boys storyline. So, the fact that many of the payoffs are still effective in spite of that is pretty good. It is a flaw. It's not a big flaw. But it is a flaw that I think makes this weaker than something like, for example, Monster. Just my thoughts on it. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.